I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Um, I know we worked on this a little bit in our one of our individual sessions, but I'd like to see if we could uh, take it a little bit deeper. There's sometimes a blockage when I hit question four, who would I be without the thought? Um, it is really hard to imagine who I would be without the thought sometimes. And you had mentioned, maybe I can't remember your exact wording, but almost like theoretically, who would someone be without the thought was one avenue, and that's been working for me. But I am still noticing that's kind of an obstacle for me, and feels almost like I'm uh, forcing the answer or like faking the answer or something like that.
Yeah, so that we don't want to fake the answer. We don't want to force the answer. I'd rather just say I can't answer that, and and just move on to a turnaround if I need to. Um, Honesty is the only thing that works in the work. The work is about our experience, and so we have to be honest to that, even if there's no answer, even if I don't get an answer. That happens for turnarounds, like, oh, I don't know. I don't know how that could be true. And you're left just kind of with a big question mark. And I'd rather leave it in that state than give like do lip service to it or try to give a quick answer that would, look good from the outside. No one can tell the difference. I'm using the right words and it sounds all right. But internally, I know I'm just glossing over there's something there that I'm not really taking the time with. The beauty about leaving a question unanswered is that the mind doesn't like an unanswered question. So it will just kind of work on it on its own over days sometimes or months, who knows? And sometimes uh, it will come up with answers later on that you would not have expected. So the process of doing the work is the process of asking a question and then waiting. And I don't know what I'll find. And sometimes nothing comes up in the immediate, in the immediate version while I'm doing the work. That being said, there are different ways to hold question four that can sometimes help to kind of find answers. There's places you can look or ways you can hold the question that may be less threatening to the ego. Because why can't I answer the question? Because I'm so attached to the thought usually that letting go of that thought seems like that's my lifeline. And if I let go of that thought, I'm going to be in danger or I'm going to lose something big or it's going to be something bad is going to happen. So that's why we hold on to these thoughts. They're stressful thoughts, but we hold on to them because we think they're protecting us, or we think it'd be worse if we didn't hold on to that thought. And so we have to be respectful of that tenacity of the mind holding on to something. But you can do that. You can be respectful of your own ego. Really, that's what we're doing here. Be respectful and bring in that question from different angles in a way that it's not as threatening and that it might be willing to engage with and see what it sees. So some examples of that can be, like you mentioned, uh, who would someone else be, right? That's almost like you have to be someone else and imagine yourself in the same situation as if you're someone else. That's one way you can do that. Another way is to just um, think of it as a total pretend experience. Like, who would I be is a hypothetical. So I don't have to change myself. I don't have to let go of this grip that I have on the thought. But I can pretend anything. I can pretend to be Superman, or I can pretend to be, a planet in outer space. I can pretend whatever I want. A fish in the ocean. I can pretend. It's like what kids do. So even while holding on to the thought, I can imagine, I can pretend, like just go off in a little side area and say, well, who would I be? Let me imagine who would I be without that thought. And then just kind of brainstorm, and some of it may sound like, that doesn't really resonate, but some of it may. And you're just giving yourself a chance to be kind of play devil's advocate with yourself. And that feels non-threatening to me usually, and usually with my clients is the same. So that can help. Um, Holding, I think that thing I said about respect to the ego is really important, because the ego didn't, the ego is being vulnerable with us when it says, I hate him or something, right? And I'm like really attached to something, or I'm really embarrassed about something, or I'm ashamed of my own thoughts. But the ego is being vulnerable and sharing that, and it's being especially vulnerable because it knows we're doing the work, and the work means that it's going to get questioned on top of it. So it takes courage for the ego to actually to participate in this process. So I, as the kind of wiser part of me, the facilitator part of me, or my ego, I want to be as gentle and as understandable and as respectful of my ego as I can be. And that means not ripping its precious attachment out of its hands, by any means. I'm never going to do that to my ego. That would be mean, it would be disrespectful, and would cause my ego to never come back and do the work again with me. So I want to say, hey, you know what, ego? You're in charge. I love that you're here, and I want to see what you find. And if you find some cool stuff, great. And if you don't, totally cool. I'm here for you. Like, I'm here to serve you. So that attitude can make the ego feel like, okay, yeah, I can at least explore. I can pretend. Like, who would I be without the thought? Oh, I can pretend. Yeah. If I wasn't like that, I, I, I can imagine. So that's one piece of it. Another thing that can help is, um, I sometimes modify the question slightly depending on how attached I am or my clients are. I'll be like, who would you be if the thought was not so front and center for you? Or who would you be if that thought, if you weren't as attached to that thought, or you weren't as if you, or who would you be if you weren't holding that thought so tightly? I love that particular wording as well. Um, those kind of things, it's still answering who would you be without the thought, but it's not like black and white. I want, who would you be without the thought? It's almost like without the thought at all. And this would be, who would you be with a little bit out without the thought? And so it gives you a little chance to explore again without feeling too threatened. That it's just going to be your your ego's toys are going to be taken away from it. So yeah, I think the overall thing that I'm taking away from just what I'm saying here is just gentleness, making sure that you don't have to get anywhere with this question, and that the ego or the self or the stuck part of me, can take as much time as it wants, and um, can even just imagine a little bit in that direction, even just a tiny step in the direction of who would I be without the thought, shows you everything. It shows you, I've seen that myself, where just a tiny step in the direction of who would I be without the thought, I'm feeling a little bit lighter. And so that's all I need to know from that question. Question 4 is not, its purpose is not to get rid of the thought. Not at all. Not at all. Its purpose is to do a comparison with the thought, question 3, so that you can see the effect of the thought. And then the mind understands that with the thought, it's kind of stressful and painful. And without the thought, it might be a little bit easier. And it doesn't have to be perfectly easy, but it might be even just a little easier. And then it's just seeing that the attachment loosens a little bit, and then you can play with turnarounds with a little more openness of mind. But worst case scenario, you can't even find any openness. Just try the turnarounds, see if they go anywhere, and if they don't, you know what? You've done your work, and you'll just, that's what the answers were this time. And who knows, there might be more answers to come over time, or you might revisit the thought, or life will give you a different situation that will cover the same material. So there's really no pressure to get, to nail it or anything like that. That's just a story that we all have of answering things right, and right might be no answer. Right might be, I'm way too attached to even consider this. Which brings up another thought. Sometimes when you're just completely blocked, you may have to just stop and write down what are your resistance thoughts to even answering this question, and do a separate inquiry on that. Like, if I answer question 4, who would I be without the thought? I'm going to be taken advantage of or something, right? That could be a real version of what's holding me tight to that thought. And so I might work that thought separately. I'm going to be taken advantage of if I answer question 4, if I even imagine who I'd be without the thought, and then see if I can find any turnarounds for that before coming back in and doing this work. So gentleness, gentleness, gentleness. That's it.
Thank you. I like it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.